Good afternoon, and welcome to our podcast series titled Past, Present, and Future: Perspectives on Mental Health in the Black Community. This initiative will consist of a series of podcasts, forums, and healing circles over a 6-month period that strive to expose the negative stigma associated with mental health, encourage open and honest discussions among men, women, and youth, and provide tangible solutions towards healing and recovery. And we want to especially show our appreciation to the City of Toronto for their support towards this worthwhile initiative. I am your host, Richard Lambie, and it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to this important session. Today's podcast is titled Mental Health and Traditional Black Masculinity. This podcast will address the link between male privilege, mental health, domestic and sexual violence, and toxic masculinity traits that have been passed down through generations. The hope of this podcast will be to build an accountable Black community and promote networks where Black masculine identifying individuals and men feel supported and understand that seeking mental health is not a weakness, and that by facing trauma, they can eliminate negative, sexist, homophobic, and patriarchal beliefs.
While the intention of this podcast is to create an environment of knowledge sharing, positive affirmations, and space for joy, some content may be emotionally triggering and of a sensitive nature. This podcast will feature content related to issues related to mental health in the Black community, which may be emotionally triggering for some. If you or someone you know is triggered by this content or is experiencing a mental health concern, including having thoughts of suicide, support is available. Immediate support is accessible by calling 211 or 1-855-310-2673. You can speak with a crisis worker at any time. Children and youth can also access telephone support 24/7 by contacting the Black Youth Helpline at 416-285-9944. For immediate emergency support, please call 911. All services are free and can be accessed confidentially.
With me to discuss these topics are Kofi Morris and Kizito Musambimana. Now, Kofi Morris is a freedom and alignment coach focused in the areas of holistic health and wellness, wealth building, and healthy relationships. He serves as an ancestral healer, utilizing energy healing and plant-based medicine, and is the founder of Cosmic Wellness Holistic Health. Additionally, Kofi volunteers much of his time in youth development, sharing his skills and experiences with community youth groups across the globe, including North America, South America, the Caribbean, and on the African continent. Kofi is also the founder of Lions and Cubs, a nonprofit organization for young men which focus on leadership and self-empowerment, and is the current executive director of Wisdom Green Earth, a nonprofit organization committed to using the arts and nature to positively impact the lives of community. Kofi has also published a book titled Change Your Life from the Inside Out: Holistic Habits Success Guide, Volume 1. Also with me is Kizito Musambimana. Kizito prides himself as a storyteller with a dream to tell successful African stories to the world. After graduating from film and television production, Toronto Film School, he attended the Independent Producers Program at Centennial College, where he learned the art of building bridges through cross-sector collaboration to create self-sufficient communities. Kizito is the founder and current executive director at the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, a nonprofit organization with a mission to build a center for healing, to provide an environment for Rwandan Canadians and other members of the Black Canadian society working to overcome traumatic experiences from genocide, wars, and legacies of slavery and oppression. In 2016, he walked from Toronto to Montreal during 17 cold winter days to raise awareness about post-traumatic stress disorder related to past wars, genocides, and the colonial legacy of oppression. That's impressive. After the walk, Kizito worked with other Rwandans in Canada to establish a center which has seen great milestones, including establishment of the Akibulan Project, the Afro-Canadian Resource Center, and the Rwandan-Canadian Interagency Hub, all of which support community leadership, governance, and capacity building, as well as fundraising and providing program funding for community organizations and or its leaders. We have a very, very esteemed group of people with us, and I'm excited to get started. I wish both of you a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Richard. Looking forward to a lively conversation.
Great. Me too. All right. So I'll start with you, Kofi. There is a popular view of masculinity in the Black community, a view that is seen from those outside of this same community. What positives and negatives can you ascribe towards this view? And what influences do you feel have shaped this view over the years?
So there's so many different various ways that I could go just in terms of approaching this question. And it came to me to just really look at some of the most predominant views that I see. And it's funny because as people are listening, I'm wondering what's coming to their minds. So there's a couple that I wanted to address. One of the views of us as Black men is that we're strong. And we're strong in the sense that there's so many different ways for you to interpret that message, but our view and the view that others have of us is that we are resilient, right? We are able to bounce back from various circumstances, situations in life. And I'm going to get a little bit, go a little bit deeper in that. Another one relative to that is we don't back down. So there's so many different views and, examples of what would look like aggression in our community, often relative to us, in public settings, community centers, even in businesses, right? As soon as a Black man is in a space where he raises his voice, for example, in any scenario, and I'm sure even brothers listening into this podcast can think of scenarios or circumstances where they were looked upon as being a threat simply because of their height, simply because of the depth of their voice. The list goes on. We lead with our uniqueness. It's another strength that I would really speak to. Another positive view of us is that we lead with our uniqueness, and that ability to allow ourselves to step outside of a box, the box that we may be placed in. And the last one I'm going to add is that we want better for ourselves. And I'm going to speak to some of the negatives that relate to some of these positives as well. But we want better for ourselves in the sense that regardless of our environment, growing up, experiences that we face, etc., you will see how this is depicted in so many different ways, whereby young men at young ages, they have these aspirations. Now, those aspirations may be entertainment based, or they may be sports related. They want to be a basketball player, want to get to the NBA. If they're into music, which is one of the major influences for young Black men and just for young people's culture anyway, right? Is the music. And they say, okay, I want to be a rapper, I want to be a producer, A, B, C, and D. Some of the views relative to those things is them wanting to create a better reality for themselves, because the examples that they've been given relative to somebody who's been able to pull themselves up and create a life for themselves are in those arenas, and they've been able to become multimillionaires as rappers and ball players and all these types of things. So the view is that they don't want to just grow up in environments where there's limitations that lead them in life. They want to be able to see the expansion of life. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to do certain things. And the only way that they're seeing for that to be done is by getting rich, right? Is by making a lot of money. So wanting better for themselves. So on the flip side of some of what I've shared, the fact that we are strong, the negative that sometimes plays out relative to that is we hide our weaknesses. We don't want to seem vulnerable or be viewed as vulnerable. So as a result, we'll hide those things. We won't share those things, both with our peers and with the other people in our lives. I mean, this is in school environments, etc. Men are told to be strong. Even as a young boy, you fall down, scrape yourself, what have you. Some of the males, whether it be uncles, your father, whoever the case may be, will tell you, brush yourself off. You got to be strong. Boys don't cry. These types of things, right? So the fact that the depiction is that we're strong. We're constantly in that space where we can't show when we're not, right? So that in itself creates a challenge, and it also, what it does is that it challenges our development. Meaning, let's say you're in a classroom and you're having challenges with a math lesson or some spelling or whatever the case may be. It may be a thought that, hey, well, I should know this, right? So I don't want to seem vulnerable. I don't want to look like I don't know it, so I'm not going to ask any questions, right? That's just in a school environment, much less a social environment. You want to look as though you know what you're talking about, so you may not share that. We don't back down. Sometimes it leads to self-harm or harm of another person, right? Another brother in our community getting into fights and things of that nature, because guess what? You disrespected me. So I'm going to make sure that you can't disrespect me. So I'm not going to back down from anything you say or do that's against me, because at the end of the day, I'm holding my respect. You got to make sure you respect me. So that can look various ways. And the extent of that is the self-hate perpetuated via the violence of our community, right? And a lack of understanding of self can lead to this ignorance in terms of our own internal strengths that can allow us to walk away from a fight or walk away from an altercation because we see ourselves and our lives as being valuable. So as a result, we're not going to put ourselves in situations that could lead to our own harm. It's quite the opposite. It's that young men will put themselves in a situation that it's kind of like the 2005 album by 50 Cent called Get Rich or Die Trying type of thing, or Ready to Die by Notorious B.I.G. 94. Like, this is 11 years before, where it's kind of like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure somebody else respects me. And I'll just add the last two, which is, leading with our uniqueness sometimes means that we may wish to stand out from the group at the detriment of the group, right? Meaning, if everybody can't be the leader in the group, right? You got to have someone who's leading, and you got to have other people that may be following the lead of a healthy leader, right? Now, the fact that we don't do that is almost like the depiction of the various different businesses, for example, that exist in our community. We talk about this often, which is, you have a barbershop here and 4 brothers started the barbershop. Well, give it a year or two and you're going to see another barbershop open up just down the block. But it's one of the brothers that left that barbershop because he wanted to lead and create his own. So now we got barbershops, we got restaurants that do the same thing, we got hair salons that do the same. Like this kind of way of being that says, like, I'm going to do my thing. And as soon as there's a challenge internally that we can't come to an agreement with, I'm going to leave and do my own thing, which also leads to the amount of organizations we have in our community vying for the same funding and dollars because we want to do our own thing. Sometimes it's at the detriment of the group. Last one I'll just add is wanting better for ourselves. Sometimes Black men will put ourselves in precarious situations to create that better. And it can influence our family and our community and put ourselves in harmful situations because we're willing to take risks that may not be healthy for us, and whether that's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual risks that we may take to put ourselves in situations so that we can receive and create that better. And sometimes it's at the detriment of the family. So we have a lot of young men who are incarcerated because they were wanting to create wealth for themselves, and they used, illegal means to be able to do so, because that's where some of the examples that they got in their community. That's how you get ahead. And as a result, now you have mothers at the courthouses every Monday and Friday, sitting on these benches crying because their young men created some crime and they're going there to bail them out or to seek bail for them. It's the same mothers that are visiting them in prison when they get locked up. It's not their friends. And then in some cases, those fathers are not present. So as a result, it falls on the mother. So now the mother's impacted, the siblings may be impacted, the family is impacted. And as a result, our community is impacted. So I'll stop there in terms of the positives and negatives, and where some of this comes from, right? Like what has shaped some of those views over the years, right? Is sometimes it does come from family, right? It does come from individuals and the males in our families, in terms of some of the pursuit of some of these things, both negative and positive. If you had a positive male figure in your life, there's a chance that some of that may rubbed off on you because you had that example. Versus if you had a negative example, you may be following that same example. Music, popular culture also plays a role in terms of the male machismo and how we're supposed to show up, what that's supposed to look like, and which is often overly aggressive. Again, we've spoken about this toxic masculinity aspect. School and education, we're often we don't feel empowered in the school system. So as a result, we seek ways to be able to identify ourselves in ways that are empowering. So a lot of the times that's, again, stepping outside of the group and asserting our manhood in particular ways, because there's a lot of that emasculation that takes place both in our school system, in society that we live in, etc. So I want to stop there because I want to make sure I'm creating space for my brother to come in and speak. But those are some of the elements and aspects that I see that connect to some of these negatives and positives. And this is kind of how a lot of the time our identity as Black men has been shaped.
Thank you so much, Kofi. And on to you now, Kizito. Kofi has touched on so many different areas. I can appreciate the fact that the positives and the negatives can come from the same person. It can come from inside the community. It could come from the family. It could come from outside the community. It could even come from outside the Black community. And just to add to some of the examples, you mentioned Biggie Smalls or Notorious B.I.G. They call it, or 50 Cent. But I think of the movie Scarface, right? And you would recall how much the movie Scarface has been taken up by the hip hop community, right? And why is that, right? Again, get rich and die trying. In the movie, one of the themes that it said, which Nas used in his song, The World Is Yours, he had that planet spinning around in his palace. This is Tony Montana. The world is yours. So again, we see where these influences come in and people in the Black community take on to it. So, but Kizito, please give me your thoughts in terms of the positives and negatives, in terms of the popular view of masculinity that we're seeing amongst our people.
And honestly, I want to thank you for putting this together and for attacking a topic so, like a lot of people are scared of talking about this subject because it touches all of us. We all have sisters, mothers, we all have brothers and fathers. And sometimes this is not a topic most people want to go into, especially in the Black community. And so I thank you for putting this together. And I think for me, I want to go back. I always go back to some of my experiences growing up. Like really thinking when you're a child, you think you're equal to your sisters, but then you could see how you're treated and how your sisters are treated, and you know you're being raised to be two different beings. In a sense that you're doing all of the heavy lifting. I grew up in Africa, and the women are doing all the light and all that. Some of it is biological, but in most cases, it's just cultural. And the question is, what's right and what's wrong? And therefore, us being here now in Canada, in a society that's trying to be inclusive and is trying to have a more balance. And listening to Kofi, I would say most of what he's describing is really as being either imbalance or just having that egoism and not being able to see a clear picture as to who we are as human beings, and how do we actually live a balanced life. And so how do we now, where we are as a Black society within a more inclusive society, how do we balance that out? How do we actually come together and have a more balanced community? We're talking about mental health and things like that. I would say that because of where we came from, because of slavery, because of colonization, because of all of the oppressions that we've lived through, having these the masculinity that we have as a Black community has helped our society, our community survive. I would say that that's one of the main, I'll probably focus just on that, like survival, being in the survival mode all the time. I think it has definitely been a positive in that sense that even when people are looking to kill us, they are afraid of us. They are afraid of Black men. They see you, and even though they say we are inferior, in most cases, they are afraid of you. They see something more stronger, more powerful than them. So yes, they deal with us like animals. Sometimes they shoot us and they beat us. And times where they've burned us, times where they have, caused wars and so forth. But at the end of the day, it all came from fear. So, and then of course, as knowing we are all we got as Black community, we tended to utilize the masculinity as a tool. We used it against our enemy, but the unfortunate thing is we've also used it against our own, especially nowadays, because if you look historically, the African families were not always as, we always were more inclusive in a sense where you're looking at how the family was brought together. Everybody knew what their role was, but at the end of the day, you didn't feel like you were better than a woman. If you had a daughter, you didn't feel like you lost something. Nowadays, especially within the last 500 years, most African families, if they have just girls, they really feel unfortunate for not being able to actually have a boy, because they think, who's going to carry my legacy? Who's going to move my community forward? Usually when you marry your daughter away, she's gone. She's no longer part of your family. This is a new tradition that I think we picked up from all of these colonization cultures and the cultures that were not our own, because there were times where, depending on which culture you grew up in, the family, the woman's family actually, the man would be able to take on the name, or at least that is the family route that you follow. If you're looking at the DNA and all those things, you follow the mother, not the father. But now it's all been changed, and so it's we're not really, like, if we are looking at the issue of masculinity in our community, we have to look at all of those pieces because they add up. You can look at, like nowadays, one of the things I wanted to point out is, and it goes back to masculinity. How many, and I don't know if you have been able to maybe ask yourself this question, because I look back in the day, like people like Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe, we've had a lot of these masculine men, tall and giants, who went to university and got degrees and did different things. But now most of us are being born to become a basketball player or a rapper, going back to what Kofi was saying. So to me, the negativity, and I tend to always go back to psychology as well, the negativity of the masculinity has been that we all tend to fall into the trap of, oh, I have to get mine today. I have to do this thing that doesn't even require much thinking. Let me go lift weight and let me run the marathon. Let me do what those what shows me and gives me the results today. And I think we miss out on taking that time to create a balance within us to say, what about what I'm actually here to do? What brought me to this planet? It's not because I'm tall and a giant that I should play basketball. I probably have other tools and skills and talents. How come we're not looking at that? But you can't look at that as a society when you are living in survival mode. I think the huge challenge for us as a society has been that we've been living through the last 500 years. We've been living through survival mode. We don't get time to just chill, relax, take 1, 2, 3 years to say, you know what, let me learn about who I am. Let me learn about what I'm doing to my fellow brother and sister. Let me learn about what they're doing to me. Let me actually see where I have gone wrong over my however many years that I'm on this planet. We don't get a chance to do that. So we are always chasing, we're always running, we're always doing something, we're always in a competition with somebody. If it's not in school, it's at work. If it's not at work, it's with the neighbor. Who has the better house? Who has the, all of that still kind of a race, but a race to nowhere. And I think that is all brought in by the society itself is masculine in a way, and I don't know who is to say whether that's a good or a bad thing, but if you look at how we've been living, especially through colonization and slavery, I think we need to evaluate which values we are following as a Black society. Do we really continue to pursue this path? And do we, do we think this is going to get us somewhere? Because if you look at Western societies, definitely the promotion, even though we are always bombarded with ads about women this and women that, it's still controlled by the masculine brain in a way that you should look at that because it's sexy. You should look at that because it's not, what's intelligent? What is more evolving? What can create more wealth for our people in the future? It's not based on that. And I think maybe if we could pull back a little bit and say, there should be a better way, there should be a better path forward. But in terms of what influences it, it's really, for me, I take it back to slavery and colonization. I think if we can relearn who we were before that as a society, I think we do better. Because right now, the Black family is in trouble. It's not just in America, it's not just here in Canada, even back home, the level of divorces that are happening because of because we tend to believe that the grass is green on the other side. We're all being pulled in by different commercialization products that's really sort of killing our family and causing even more masculinized young boys. Because again, if you're being raised by only women, or if you're only raised in a home where fathers are not really there in their true masculinity, they're not balanced, naturally you're gonna also grow up to be abusive. You're gonna grow up to do these kinds of behaviors, like everything that Kofi was talking about. And I think we need to get to a point where we can look at this and say, it's not just about our boys, it's not just about the mothers. We all need to come together and find a way to actually go back to who we are supposed to be. And I'll give it back to you, Richard.
Thank you once again. Wow. From each of your contributions, we could have a session on their own. There's so many things that both of you have touched on, particularly what I'm picking up. You started to answer the question, or you got fairly well into answering sort of why this is happening. And you looked at the past, the negative influence of the past, colonialization, but then also modern culture. I think we're all alluding to this modern, capitalistic, Eurocentric get everything now, get everything today, that culture. And I think it's, let me not assume that it is known, but what we really need to accentuate here is that our past was a more balanced past. Our past gave us what we needed for our families and for ourselves as men. It showed us responsibility. It showed us power. It showed us strength, but not toxic masculine strength. Strength in sharing with your family. Strength in being responsible. Strength in being a part of a community and knowing where you fit in. You mentioned that the Black family is in trouble, Kizito. Now, just as a reminder to everyone, we're speaking with Kofi Morris and Kizito Mitsimbam. I'm going to redo it. Let me start. So this is a break. I made a mistake. Let me start again. I want to thank all of you for joining us once again. We are speaking with Kofi Morris and Kizito Musa. Let me start again. Musabimana, right?
Yes.
Musabimana. All right. 3, 2, 1. We're speaking with Kofi Morris and Kizito Musabimana. It's been a powerful discussion. We're talking on so many different areas. We're looking at what has been happening to the male, the Black male in this society, and we can drill right down to the greater Toronto area, although these are things that are happening to the Black male all over the world. We're looking at the influences that have shaped where things are. We've looked at the breakdown in the family and its effect on the male. Now, with everything we've experienced, I think it's well established the importance of healing and that we as Black males need to identify what that healing looks like, and how that healing and the importance of that healing helps us relate to ourselves firstly, but then also our families and the broader community. So Kofi, let me go back to you and ask you, do we know as Black males what this need looks like? Can we identify it? What do we need in terms of healing?
Absolutely. So, oftentimes, one of the things that we look at is the impact of our history on our present day, right? The name's escaping me, so just give me one moment. One of my esteemed elders and ancestors, Dr. John Henry Clarke, says that history is the social political clock that people use to tell their is the clock that people use to tell their social political time of day, right? History is the clock that people use to tell their social political time of day. We have to look at the impact of colonialism and Eurocentricity on our community, on our value-based systems, on our culture. Relative to your question in terms of healing and what it looks like, if we don't look at the past, we cannot clearly see where we are presently and why we are where we are, nor be able to forge positively and strongly into our future because we're not clear where we came from. So the healing starts with the Sankofa principle, which is looking back, going back to fetch it. For those that may not be familiar, Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol from West Africa, which is the image of a bird. It's a fictitious bird, but it's the image of a bird that's looking back, and the image is of this bird looking back and um, picking up or gathering or grasping an egg from its back. And it's symbolic because, much as us as African people, African descendants, our history is rooted in our symbology. And the fact that we would use imagery to tell stories and to make examples for us to understand things. So having an understanding of this principle, it means that for us to move forward, we have to be clear where we've come from. And the healing starts, in my perspective, a lot from that space. So understanding that our history formed our identity, formed who we are, the way in which we show up, the things that we're interested in, the things that in which we're passionate about, also ties into our ancestry and ties into our family line. So in a lot of cases, because we're walking around with this lack of identity and understanding of our past, it creates these challenges that we can identify with various different cultures and ways of being that can be harmful to us because we're not understanding who we are and those principles and values that we need to be living out in our own homes. So now having that ability to be able to really dig into, okay, well, what is it that allows me to address these various challenges that are faced in my society and my family? Oftentimes we would go to our spirituality, we go to our spiritual systems, we go to what can also be, which can also show up in in our religious institutions, and that's one of the ways in which we would address traumas. We would address, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical wounds. Is going to our spirituality. So everything from plant-based healing, herbs and different attributes, and actually utilizing nature, which connects us back to our roots. This is where the journey starts. So a lot of indigenous cultures, you see, they have spiritual systems that are rooted in nature, meaning that nature plays this role in our holistic connection, in terms of our relationships to one another. Our ability to heal specifically ties back into our ability to connect with the elements. So in a recent healing circle that I was working with within C, the organization, one of the things we explored was healing, looking at the element of earth. And earth, historically, relative to traditions, speaks to home. It speaks to a place that we go where we feel a sense of comfort, where we feel a sense of connection, where we feel a sense of belonging and a sense of well-being. So being able to heal, we need to go back to the ways that worked for us ancestrally. We need to go back to the ways that worked for us historically, that allow us to ground ourselves in a way of being that connects one another, that connects each one to one another. And our ability to move forward is really and truly rooted in that ability to go back to fetch it in the Sankofa principle, getting back to our traditional ways of healing and acknowledging our connection to the earth and the elements, and then to be able to utilize those principles that have grounded us and have strengthened us and empowered us for hundreds of thousands of years. This is not new. However, you do see this in some present spiritual systems. Ifa, the Yoruba culture explores these principles, right? There's the Akan, and I can go on, right? A lot of our African traditional systems are still present today and still being utilized. Those that do seek them often find that space to be able to heal and address traumas from our past, to be able to move forward and address those wounds so that we can move to a place of holistic healing and well-being.
So Kofi, I want to just interject for a moment. And I really want to emphasize, I'd really want to ask you rather to emphasize this point, you see, because, I wonder, whatever system a person chooses to use, I think the most important part is to recognize what's working and what is not working. And why is it important for us, and we're speaking on males here, why do we as males need to one, look at our past and also recognize our spiritual component. Why is that important? You see, because, you know, if I was to talk to my friend, right, who is white, right, and not in a negative way, just to ask them a question, could they appreciate this significance, right? Again, not that they would not necessarily be a spiritual person. Why is it important for us as Black males to recognize, one, our past, and the spiritual element?
So as Black males specifically, you know, a lot of one of the things I often say is that, you know, men said that we learn by example, right? We see another man, you know, you're doing some forestry work or something. You see a man cutting a tree with an axe. We observe how he does it, and then we duplicate that action and that behavior. So because we learn by example, the opportunity that we have is to be able to acknowledge the fact that our learning process, it's a collective experience. So to be able to address these wounds of our past and acknowledge our connection to our history, we want to acknowledge the fact that it's important that our leadership, our eldership, those who are in leadership positions, we are in a space where we're not always the leader. We have the opportunity to follow, going back to my previous statement, and being able to follow a form of leadership that's healthy, that's, as you said, that's practical, that's working for us. These systems and ways of being that I spoke to, these have been utilized for hundreds of thousands of years. So to be able to follow that lead of our past, of our ancestral past, we're utilizing ways of being that have been proven to work, that have been proven to, and it doesn't mean that they're perfect, but we do have a blueprint, you know, or for a black print, first of all, lack of a better word, to say that, listen, we have the ability to change things. Marcus Garvey, one of our historians, you know, one of our historical figures from our past, born in born in Jamaica, was able to come to the Americas and have over 2 million followers worldwide, based upon ways of being that were specific to our culture, right? So I hope this answers your question, to say that in order for us to move forward, us as Black men, we can utilize the leadership of our past, we can utilize the spiritual systems of our past, we can even go in from a perspective that you said, just from a value-based perspective. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a spiritual way of being. I'll give an example. The Ubuntu principle says, I am because we are, right? The Ma'at principles, right? That speak to, justice, that speak to reciprocity, that speaks to balance, right? Temperance, like these values that we've had, that have been used ancestrally, still tie into our day-to-day experience. Because if we were looking at things from a place of balance, we would look at our relationships not from a standpoint of, I'm the leader, everybody's supposed to listen to me. We're supposed to acknowledge the fact that there's leadership in my family, and we all play a particular role. We all bring a particular element or aspect to the table. So as a result, how do I create balance within my family? And that's not just our immediate family, our extended family as well. What role do I play in my family, in terms of how do I pass on these traditions, cultures, and ways of being that have worked for hundreds of thousands of years? Lastly, I'll say the Nguzo Name principles, or in Kwanzaa, they're called Nguzo Saba principles. Nguzo Name speaks to an 8th principle, which is self-respect, right? But utilizing these principles, these are not just to be done 7 days of Kwanzaa, they're to be celebrated throughout and utilized throughout the year, right? So, Moja speaks to unity, right? Kujichagulia, self-determination. These principles are applicable to our day-to-day lives and how we approach our relationships, both with ourselves, with our families, and with our community.
And I want to add to that, Brother Kofi, thank you for being almost a library for us, because I think one of the things I'm realizing as we converse here is we share this knowledge. We both understand this, but the biggest factor is that among our general society, many men do not know this. If you look at the level of belief in terms of what religion do people follow, most of our Black men are Christians, or they're Muslims, or they are some form of more than religion. They are not connecting to the root, to the African root. They are not connecting to any one of those values or traditions that we all aspire to be. And obviously, some of us like you, Brother Kofi, I can tell you are definitely more embedded into it. And obviously, as a healer, it's something I definitely want to reach out to you to learn more about this. But my point being, the idea, and this is where I think we go back to the level of being in balance and therefore looking in the wrong places for help. I agree with Kofi in terms of where we need to go historically. Like, if you want to learn where you're going, you need to know where you're coming from. And Brother John Henry Clarke is one of my heroes. But what I'm going to say is, when you look at most of our people, especially the ones who are born again Christian, for example, anytime they get in trouble, they look to the sky and they call to Jesus. To me, that is an element you're supposed to have internally. When we think of our ancestors and how they looked at gods, or God small g, it's more something that was internally in you. So when you look at Jesus, it's a masculine title. You're calling to an outside Christ instead of trying to reach and to aspire to become that thing that you're now calling for help for. To me, it's the idea of following these religions and different Western traditions is what has actually caused us to even be in more traumatized conditions than we should be. Like, I think going through slavery and colonization physically is something you can overcome. The biggest trauma, the biggest challenge that I think we have as men, and our women, of course, but mainly as men, is that we are traumatized no longer physically, but mentally and spiritually, to the point that we don't even see the trauma. I one time said that if you are Black anywhere on the planet and you're not traumatized, you must be superhuman, because we all are traumatized for one way or another. Traumatized intergenerationally because of what our parents went through, or traumatized because of what we personally went through. And so to then pretend that that's not happening, or to say, okay, I realize this is happening, but then instead of the solution becomes, oh, let's go to church, or let's find a way to take medication, without really going internally, without going to the root, which is what we're talking about in terms of the history, in terms of your diet, in terms of how you actually think and what you put in your mind. Like, if you're watching television, the mainstream television Monday to Friday, I can guarantee you that at the very least, you are causing harm to your mind and to your soul. There is no way somebody who is going through healing can maintain that level of harm, internalization of harm through media, and say you're well off. So I think where we go for healing is definitely we start by learning all of this wonderful culture that Kofi was laying out for us. Is we start finding out who we are, where we're from as a people, and connect to those sources. Like, one of the reasons you were talking about when you were introducing me, you asked me why, you didn't ask me, but you talked about how I walked from Toronto to Montreal. What you don't know is I was actually putting a ricochet on my back from Toronto to Montreal. And one of the reasons why I did that was to demonstrate spiritually more, I wanted to demonstrate what I had gone through in terms of I lived through, I had my own challenges with trauma, obviously lived through the Rwandan genocide against Tutsis in 1994. And I wanted to show my community and everyone else who was seeing my journey that it's not just my mental health right now. It is also everything I went through since day one. And I'm demonstrating that to you. I'm putting all these things all the way to Montreal, then taking a flight back home for the first time in 20 years, because I have finally connected to the element that I needed. And guess what that element was? It was the history. History that connected me to my people finally, where I started seeing Rwanda as my country again, because I went through trying to understand who we are as a people. And then of course it's connected to Egypt, to the ancient Egyptians and all of that. You know, I can imagine you both know, but for the people who do not know, we are incredible. We have a huge, important piece to play in this world. And the sooner we know this, the better it is for our healing, the better it is for our mental health. And honestly, the only thing I can say for people who want to know, like, where do we go to recover, to heal from all these, what some people might call toxic. I don't really agree with toxic masculinity. I just think it's people are confused, people are lost, and we need guidance. And maybe looking for people like the gentleman here, Coffee, brother Coffee. That's where I think people need to start looking at, and really, like you said, Richard, what works for you, find out what works for you and do that. For me, for example, where I can find some time, I do my best to meditate. I practice Taoism, and this is a tradition most people might consider Eastern, as in Asian. But again, if you understand all of these, how our traditions migrated, you know that most of the Asian traditions are originating from Africa. So that's where I found a home for me, and it helps me to sort of make sense of the world. It allows me to feel fully in who I am as a man, and it allows me to treat everybody the way I want to be treated, which is something that I really wish we can all learn to do, especially in today's world. But again, it's hard to do when your governments themselves don't show as an example of what a true leader should be doing, meaning treating others as you want to be treated. But I think if we could find that within ourselves as men, I honestly believe that, especially that our culture is now led through those lenses, others will be able to see, to follow that example as well.
Again, thank you so much for your comments, Kizito. I'll just interject. We are a little bit limited for time. Quickly, I did want to interject because I appreciate the fact that both of you showed your ways for how you got to where you are now. And I'll just say with myself, you mentioned history. That was so important to me. Now I am a Christian, and I do study, I do reach my spirituality through Christianity, but it was only when I was able to recognize the history of Christianity and that it goes far beyond European influence. There is a history of Christianity in Africa going back centuries and is there today. And having that global awareness of it and not being relegated only to the experiences of Christianity on this side of the world helped me. That was one of the challenges that I had to face. And I just wanted to share that because maybe people out there, who are Christians may be thinking, oh, well, what am I, get your awareness, learn your history, and you will find your direction, you will find your path. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to ask for, I think the last thing we'll do here, we spoke about an example of a young man leaving a grocery store. I would like both of your comments on it. I'll start with you, Kofi, and ask you to please describe the scenario. And then if you could give your perspective on it, and then Kizito, if you could jump in with your perspective as well. I think that's going to be an excellent way for us to kind of look at what just the dynamic between this male and his partner, the female, and what we could glean from this story.
Absolutely, Richard. And going on that last point with regards to I will say spiritual development is in my book I talk about the principles. My book is called Change Your Life from the Inside Out, Holistic Habit Success Guide, Volume 1. And this is a book that was written as a result of my 20 plus years of exploring my own journey relative to healing, self-development, and self-empowerment, and understanding that healing itself is a journey, not a destination. And I will say the same thing with regards to spiritual development. You know, Jesus, the historical depiction of Jesus in a lot of cases is not only Eurocentralized, but also Jesus was an Essene. For those that are not familiar with the Essene, and so again, even the principles of Christianity are rooted in African spirituality, and a lot of the modern explorations of those of religion are rooted in African spirituality. The tree of life, that is the basis of the Kabbalah system, is rooted in Kemetic spirituality, ancient Egyptian spirituality. So let's, if we remember the roots, going back to Sankofa, the roots of things, we don't how do I call it? We don't disregard the fruit or the branches of the tree for the root of the tree. We understand that the root of the tree is what allows for the tree to have its health, the branches to have its health, and as a result, the fruit. So a lot of times we are discussing and talking about the fruit, and oftentimes we're not recognizing the root. So I just want to share that piece, right? That it is a journey unto itself. And
Thank you.
So going
Very
back,
powerful.
yeah, right. So going back to the experience that I had just going to a grocery store, coming out, I saw a gentleman, brother, walking to the grocery store. It seemed as though maybe his partner was dropping him off, was waiting in the car while he went to the grocery store. We ended up walking out around the same time. And when he exited the grocery store, he had maybe 2 bags with him. Didn't look very heavy or anything. And as he walked out, the vehicle that he came in, which was most likely, his partner driving the vehicle, was a little bit further down the just maybe a couple, meters away from the front of the grocery store. And as he came out, he looked to the left, he saw the car, and he kind of just looked forward. And then eventually she drove the car up, and and then he got in the car. And I thought that it was an interesting view, simply because the manner and his mannerism, his body language said, why am I waiting in a sense? The vehicle should be here. The way he kind of just signaled to kind of look over and then look ahead, as opposed to walking to the vehicle, for example. It was an interesting depiction for me. And regardless of how, how it's viewed, I don't know the details of the scenario between the two of them. But the way that he postured, it was as though she should have been there as he's coming out of the grocery store. I'm getting the groceries. You need to come meet me. And I just thought of it in my head to say, where do we get our views and our expectations, relative to us as Black men and in our roles as men, and how are the other people in our lives to show up, specifically our partners in this scenario, and what is the view of what's expected, and where did that come from, right? Where do we get that from? Is it, again, rooted in what we saw, in our own families growing up? Is it rooted in, again, as we just discussed, our religious institutions, modern society? What are the views? Where do we get them from? And how do we navigate, going back to what you mentioned, Richard, what's practical and what works for us, acknowledging our traditions and culture and being able to honor both, right? I think, that's really the takeaway for me with that scenario. And for me, I could say, okay, maybe I would have just walked to the vehicle, as opposed to like, you're supposed to be here type of thing. But I would say that's also rooted in the type of relationship that I cultivate within my own relationships, and that there's a healthy balance in a sense to say, well, the expectation is that we're both going to lead with integrity, and the fact that I trust that you have my best interests in mind, and vice versa, we can meet each other halfway, if that makes sense, right? So that was the view that kind of came to me, was where does this come from? Where do our views of matter come from? Where do our views of what's expected from our partnerships to come from, and those in our circles? And how do we maintain tradition as well as practicality?
And then maybe to add to that, Kofi, how do we even know which tradition is actually an authentic tradition, right? Like I was having a conversation with a couple of my friends. We are actually having, it was after a community meeting, and we usually just kind of have a talk where we talk about different things. And we decided to talk about, it was before my trip to Africa, we decided to talk about relationships and how we men treat women in our lives here in Canada versus how we do in Africa. And we were talking about how we remember, like when we were children, and this is when I realized it was not just me, but for example, if me and my brothers were playing and making noise and my mom walked in the room, we would just keep going and we wouldn't even, it's almost like unless she's there to call us for something, for food or something, we wouldn't care, we just keep going. But as soon as our father walked in the room, we would all shut and stand still and be quiet. And he didn't say anything. He would just walk by, go to his room, and then after a few seconds, that's when we start like doing what we were doing again. And when I say that, she said exactly the same thing that happened to her. And then my friend said the same thing. We're both wondering. And that's when we realized, where does that come from? Does, for example, do these parents, these fathers in our life, did they know that they were doing that to us? Because whatever they did, we internalize it and we feel like we should do it everywhere. Meaning, everywhere where a man works, if there is a child in their life or a woman in their life, they should sort of, basically, their man is the sun and they should sort of revolve around him. If he wants something, it should be right there. For example, if he comes from work, she comes from work with him the same 8 hours a day, but he's supposed to sit at the table. The dinner should be ready and he should sit and they both eat. And then when they're done, he gets up, he goes and does his thing. The woman goes and washes the dishes. And that is a thing that is not questioned in my society, even here in Canada. So the question is it right? Why do we do it? We definitely know that. I was giving you guys an example earlier. Some of the things that we do, women in our life, or children in our lives do not appreciate it. They just do it because it's what we think is normal or natural. The question I was asking when you finished talking coffee is, do we even know what these traditions we're following are from? And I think is where I go back to. We really need to go back and reevaluate who we are from day one. And then, of course, that doesn't mean that our ancestors did everything right. We can always also collect them, right? But at least we need to know what is our traditions, what did we borrow through time, and how can we collect some of our behaviors. But I do agree with you, there is a lot of behaviors that we take on or we champion thinking is right. But it really, I think when we are sitting in our own quiet room, we know that some of the things we do as men needs to be reevaluated, and we need to think about not just us and our interests, but also put ourselves in some of the children and the women in our lives and think, what do they feel? Do they want to do that? Is that something that they really do because it's a tradition, and now let's look at that tradition.
You both bring up such excellent points, and I think about my childhood and growing up in Durham region to Jamaican parents. The story is similar to yourself, Kizito. Maybe my father might get upset with us making noise. My mother might also be upset, but my sister and I knew only one of them was going to take action in a physical way, if you know what I mean. And we just knew that was the case. But I also recognized something in my life as well, right? In that, I mean, so some people may not agree with those delegations, but then there's other aspects as well, right? I don't recall ever seeing my mother taking out the garbage. That was my father when he was around, and when he wasn't around, it was me, right? So she's not taking out the garbage. I wasn't doing the dishes, but she wasn't taking out the garbage. So, and again, this is not in everybody's case, but in some cases there is that sharing of responsibilities, although even that has some stereotypical aspects as well. The man takes out the garbage, never does the dishes. The woman does the dishes and the cooking. that, right? I see today in a few societies, not just here in Canada, that it has turned. I do see women pushing back, and rightfully so, for some of these stereotypical things. But I only brought up the point because if there are stereotypical roles being assigned, but each person is doing their share, and that there is work being done, although they're stereotypical, doesn't that work out? Isn't that okay? If I'm explaining myself correctly. So this has been an incredible discussion. Again, I want to remind everybody, we're speaking with Kofi Morris and Kizito Musambimana. And it's just been a very powerful discussion. And I really wanted to look forward. I don't think we can wrap this podcast up without looking forward. I think we can all agree that when you get to a certain level of consciousness and awareness of self, that you can recognize, the hope is that you can recognize what you're doing well and what needs to be improved upon. And Kofi, I know you touched on that before as well, in that it's a journey, and we may never be perfect, but we should always be aware and be self-aware and trying to improve. So I think it is really important for us to start to look at what is it we want. What do we want Black masculinity to look like? And I'm not going to sit here and say that we will come up with all of the answers, but we certainly can point out the things that maybe we don't want it to be. I think we can see that. But I also think that strength in a Black man is a good thing when it's done in the perspective of love and in perspective of family. That's my opinion. So that's where you can see strength in a positive, but it could also, of course, be in a negative for the issues we mentioned before. But if you're conscious, you should be able to look forward and make a change, and encourage those around you to make a change. Encourage your children, your son to make a change, your friends' children to make a change. What do we want that to look like? And individually, in the context of the family unit, and then sort of following through to the community. And I mention the word community because another aspect that I know the three of us are quite aware of, that we do as Black people, as people of African descent, appreciate community. I think that's one thing that we see everywhere in all of our communities in the world, right? We all believe that it takes a village to raise a child. I think that's a pretty universal thing that slavery, colonialism could never destroy, no matter how hard they tried. So I'll start with you, Kizito, this time around. What do we want Black masculinity to look like?
And again, I want to thank you for approaching this topic. I think it's a big one. It's these conversations need to be had everywhere, especially in the mainstream. Of course, I don't like when the mainstream takes on topics. Usually it's kind of coming with an agenda. But if really they were to approach these topics with love, and I love how you use the word love, I think we will get somewhere. I will say this. I think I had someone say a quote the other day that resonated with me. I added to my wall, to my vision wall, which is every action is taken from either love or fear. To me, it's that simple. If Black masculinity could just sort of derive from love, we are not even having a conversation. Right now, we are good. The problem is, I think all of our problems as a society, Black society, or just overall, but mainly our society as Black community and Black men, which is what we are focusing on, most of our thoughts are a result of fear. fear of, not knowing whether you're gonna be alive tomorrow. You don't, you're not secure in your own identity. Like there's just so much fear, and that causes us to take all of these negative actions that leads us to, obviously one negative action leads up to the next, even to the worst action, and then we keep sort of rolling around, and we're in this cycle, and we are never able to remove ourselves from that area and kind of see what we are going through. I think what I would like to see, especially from a young age, for our young men and women, but in this case, our young men. And I go back to what Kofi says also. We learn by example. We are not, if you notice a lot of, in our school systems, most of our men are not doing well because they're sitting in chairs. We, as Black men, we're not used to learning by sitting in chairs. You're supposed to show us how something is done, and we sort of emulate and we put our own twist to it, our own creativity to it, and we give you something beautiful, something amazing. And so if we can go back and actually look at, from a young age, and look at a young Black man and say, oh, this is who you are. Let's look at your chart. Let's see what you are actually, what's your gift, what's your talent, what are you good at? And then sort of draft and craft a journey for each individual. I actually, sometimes I say this because I do a lot of personal development as well. And I mention this to young men and they look at me like I'm crazy. But to me, is the only way we get to a level of positive, healthy, balanced masculinity is if a young man grows up knowing, okay, you know what? Oh, I'm good at doing this. Oh, I'm good at doing this. I have this strength. I can actually do this and this. And even before I go to school, I know what I'm going to become at the age of 40. And we can do this. We have enough science now from different approaches to determine this at the age of 7. You can tell a young man, you're going to be this, because this is the tools and talents you brought into this world. So I think by really taking time, if not obviously for those who are not able to do that at that age, at a young age, maybe before we go to universities, we take like 3 years of our life and say, you know what, I'm just going to take this time to learn about me and the world and the environment and the universe that I find myself in. Before I take on any major at university or college, let me take these 3 years to read these books about, general history, African history, European history, whatever. Let me actually take time to internalize this world that I'm in. And then I can make decisions moving forward. I think because obviously we always talk about masculinity, thinking about men, but even women they do have a bit of masculinity. So I think that is what masculinity in us is requiring of us to kind of have a guidance, that church, that power that says, this is the direction I'm going to go. Because once you have a direction, you know what to do with that power. You know what to do with that energy, what we call masculinity. You know how to actually use it to guide you. But when you're lost, it's going to, no matter what, that power is there. Is the question, where is the direction that power is heading to? Is it heading into a gang group? Is it heading into a club? Is it making music videos and telling women to dance naked? Like, what is that masculinity actually doing? Or is it building a legacy? So to me, when you take that time to learn, you take that time to heal, because as I mentioned, we all traumatized in one way or another. Then you have a particular path ahead for rebuilding. And I believe that once you have that map laid out for yourself as a man or a woman, then you won't have to worry about what your masculinity is doing, because it's balanced. It knows what its purpose is. It knows where it's heading. So I don't know if that is, maybe that answers your question, but for me, it goes, that's what I see when I think of Black masculinity and where we want it to go. I want us to have vision. I want us to think like our ancestors did and imagine a better world for our people and actually go ahead and build it. That's really where I see, and really come from a place of love. Because right now, most of our decisions are made from fear, and hence why we don't end up going anywhere, because you cannot make a decision from a place of fear and come up with any positive results.
Very powerful. No, and I mean, you touched on one of the important points that Kofi had brought up. You mentioned it as well, the concept of Sankofa, you know, and I don't know, the African term for this. Maybe you can tell me. I only know the term dialectical, in that you're going in a circle, and so it looks almost like you're in the same place, but you're actually not. You're in a different space, not a circle, a spiral rather. And the next time you come around, you're a different person, and you've adapted based on your experiences and your awareness as a result of your experiences. I've tried my best to live my life that way. Not that that it's perfect. There's always room to learn, but I find that when I look at something and then in a later time period, I look back on it, I have a different perspective based on my experiences, based on talking to people. And I found that was very useful. So, what do you think about it, Kofi, about the way forward, what we should do?
It's a great question, and I'm taking my time in following up from the response of my brother, because I mean, there's so much here. I love what you shared in terms of envisioning a better world for our people and building it. You know, as men, we're builders, and a lot of the times, I'll say this: there's a lot of displacement in our community. There's a lot of feelings of abandonment and lack of clarity relative to who we are, and as a result, they say, when you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. At the end of the day, a lot of us are kind of walking aimlessly, even in our careers, in our professions, simply because we're pursuing things that are not in alignment with our purpose and the reason why we're here. And there's various different reasons for that. But the thing I want to just touch on is this piece around us being builders and us being able to create a different future for our people. At the end of the day, a lot of us are moving and creating realities that are very individualistic, which ties into the whole Eurocentric influences in terms of our identity and who we see ourselves to be. If we're looking more holistically, which is the view that is of our ancestors, understanding that our role as Black men is to build and to create community, it means that we're understanding that we all play a particular role. And there's times that we need to follow, there's times that we need to lead. And we need to have, again, systems that work for us, that look at the whole picture and understanding what role the children play, right? How we're able to plant seeds for their own development. I love what was said with regards to us learning and how we learn as African children. The current system and structure of learning and education is not working for us. We line up in these lines, we go to, it's like this saying of this life coach. He says that, we wake up in a box and we drive a box to get to another box, and we sit in that box, we stare at a box all day, and then we do work on a box, and then you might pick up another little box, which is your phone, to engage in all day. And we drive back home in a box, and he's like, the one thing maybe that cylinder is the cup that you might drink your coffee in, your tea in, or whatever the case may be. But all of these they're not, they're representations of the way in which we think and the way in which we've been taught is a very linear way of being, right? As opposed to a holistic way of looking at things and understanding how our lives tie into each and every one of us, the Ubuntu principle, going back to that, and understanding how we build is not going to be an individualistic, linear way of being. It's going to be a holistic, circular way of looking at our village and our community and the needs of our community. And every community, the education system was based upon what that child needed to learn, to grow, to create, and to take part in, and to become a contributing member of the village, of the community. So we need to get back to that space where educating our children in environments that are conducive to their learning, as our brother said, being in nature and being in environments that they can be stimulated. That this whole ADHD culture and the Ritalin, uses of Ritalin and these drugs and different things are direct examples of the fact that we move so much away from our ways of being and our ways of learning. So getting back to those ways, cultivating those ways of being, creating our own schools, right? It's not that it hasn't been done, because it has. We've had over 4 independent private Afrocentric schools, African-centered schools in Toronto alone. A lot of people are not even aware of that history, but we have those individuals who built those schools who are still available. These things do not have to be created from scratch. These curriculums don't have to be created from scratch. These ways of being and creating and connecting culture, spirituality, and agriculture and earth sciences to the ways in which our children learn, right? These are formats. These are templates that can be utilized, right? Elder Kai, Shakam Kai, near Ma'a, and Sister Tafari were the founders of Umoja Learning Circles, a school that ran for over 12 years in the city, right? Shabaka and Ucha opened their school, right? Subsequent to Senatui Ba'a, which was a school that came after the Umoja Learning Circle. Those are 3 schools that started in our community. These individuals are still available to us, right? So we have the capability, we have all of the wherewithal to make it happen. Our ancestors are behind us and backing us. The values and principles of our past, the cultural norms that can work for us are all available to us. What do we want it to look like is not an individual question. It's a collective question that we need to continue to sit down and engage in this dialogue. If you're listening into this right now and you're like, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the building for our community. I want to be part of an institution that's going to help to create a different future for the next 7 generations of our children. Feel free to to contact us. Let's build, let's connect, let's create, because some of the things, they're already in motion. It's just not knowing that they are. A lot of people want to do something, they just don't know where to turn. So let's utilize that principle of Ubuntu. Let's understand that our lives are interconnected in the Ujima principle of collective work and responsibility. Let's understand that our neighbors' problems are our problems, and the only way for us to move forward is together.
Wow, I almost don't want to stop. This has been an incredible journey, just so powerful. Once again, I want to thank my guests, Kofi Morris and Kizito Musambimana, 2 powerful, conscious brothers who have taken their time, who have shared with us their time, shared their ideas, their thoughts, their passions. And we really hope that everyone will benefit from this podcast. Again, you have been a part of a podcast series titled Past, Present, and Future: Perspectives on Mental Health in the Black Community. Again, I want to thank my esteemed guests. I have a feeling this won't be our last time conversing. I'm sure there'll be more that we will be doing. Maybe down the road, there'll be more podcasts. Also want to thank the City of Toronto once again for their support towards this endeavor. We wish everyone a wonderful day, and please listen to this and other podcasts that will be going on in the near future. Thanks again, everyone.